Welcome back to my studio. So I finished this little stained glass piece, kind of putting into practice all those things I said I hope would kind of speed it up. And it actually did speed it up a fair bit. I think it took me probably about 8 hours total of painting to do this. Now that's still more than typically I would spend on a little 12 by 12, but it's heading in the right direction. So I'm going to be working on today a 24 by 24. And I'm going to try and add a few other things that might speed it up. So first of all, I'm going to try and simplify the number of divisions of space and kind of take down the number of shapes in these little tiny shapes. So I think that will help it. Also, the brushes that I'm using. The stiff bristle brushes that are really good for expressive brush strokes, are not necessarily the best for getting into these little tight spaces and getting into corners. So I'm going to block in the new painting, the line work, and then while that's drying, I'm going to zip down to Curry's, my local art store, and take a look. And I'm going to try a few different brushes to see. I think I can actually speed the process up if I can find a brush that's a little better suited than what I have here. So stick around and we'll get on to the next painting. So I'm about to start a new painting, so same as before, I'm going to do it in acrylic using one of those little stiff bristle brushes. I'll put the photo up on the video here to show what I'm working from. This is from a place called Bridgewater, which is where I used to teach when I used to teach workshops. And this was actually one of the that very first season when I started painting the glow of the sun. I did a version from this photograph, and I think this will translate itself really well into the stained glass look. So I'm going to put a time lapse on, and I think I'll actually add some commentary too to try and explain my thought process as I'm dividing this space up into shapes. So the first thing that I want to do is block in the main tree shapes. And so you can see I already kind of wasn't happy with a couple of the lines. So I kind of scrubbed them out as best I could. I'll get around to fixing those later. And same with this second tree that comes in. So at this stage, I'm really persnickety about making sure the lines, especially the major ones, are good ones. And I'm avoiding parallel lines and tangents. And after I've got the trees blocked in, there's some foreground rocks, some foliage shapes that are going to be suggestive of leaves. And in the background, those are going to be like suggestive of bushes. Now these other lines I'm putting in here, these are just to break up the space. And again, I'm avoiding tangents, I'm avoiding parallel lines, concentric curves, and then just putting in some of these little leaf shapes for added interest. Then darkening up all the lines, making sure it's dry. I'm going to come in with gesso, block in the sun area, and also clean up some of those areas where I made the corrections, just going over them with gesso. And then once that's dry, I'm going to come back in with the red acrylic again and paint over that. So that's just so I don't get too confused with all of these lines here. So I have this all blocked in. Now I'm ready to start in the oils. And as you know, I've been trying to figure out ways to speed up this process. So I just want to kind of sidetrack here, a little anecdote. I actually had almost a little minor argument going on between a couple people on one of my posts where someone asked, I think it was the Mountain Marsh piece, someone asked, how long did this take you? So I told them, I think it was about 12 hours. And then someone else chimed in and said, oh, like, you know, how long it takes is never important. It's only important, you know, how much enjoyment you get out of it. And kind of was almost kind of lambasting this person for like, how dare you ask how long it took? And so I responded back, because he said it's never important. And I kind of responded back and said, well, that's not 100% true. It's like, if you're doing this for a living, how long it takes you to do a painting is in fact important, because that will kind of be a consideration in whether or not this is a viable business or not. But that just again got me back to that whole idea that some people think, you know, when you think about art or music or whatever, People think it's this holier than thou thing that the world should never intrude on and commerce should never have a part in it. And I also think that's why there's that whole kind of cliche of the starving artist. Because if you are an artist who's trying to make a living off your art, you are in business. And how much it costs you to produce every painting is going to impact how much you can earn. And your time is a cost. If it takes me twice as long to produce this style of painting, I'm only going to be able to produce and sell half as many paintings, and that's going to cut my earnings in half. So how long it takes you is important. Now, should that take precedence over the quality of the work? No. If it takes that long, it takes that long. But as we're seeing here with me kind of trying to kind of troubleshoot this whole stained glass thing, there are reasons why it's taking me twice as long that I can potentially do something about. So the whole idea of doing the underpainting of the line work in acrylic, the blocking in of the sun first, and doing that a little more kind of resolved in acrylic will speed up the process. So I also realized there was a couple other things that were slowing me down. One was my brushes. I was using fairly inexpensive hog bristle brushes, and they don't retain a really sharp edge very. Sorry, the video got cut off because we ran out of storage. So as I was saying, those hog bristle brushes don't retain a sharp edge very long, and particularly when you mix them in water, when you use water to clean your brushes, because they're not meant to be used in water, and they get kind of frayed and the bristles kind of stick out, which makes it very difficult cutting into some of these hard edge corners. So I was just down at my art store and got a variety of different brushes. Now I loved using the Curry's brushes because they perfectly suit what I want to do for my other style. They're also the cheapest brushes that the store sells, which also works out great. These, on the other hand, are Escoda brushes, and they're quite a bit more expensive. But I also think, so I've got a couple different synthetic bristles and a couple natural ones, and I'm going to just do a test to see if these in fact will allow me to paint quicker and cut into these shapes with less corrections. And also I just want to make sure I really do a good job of taking care and cleaning these, because they're a little more expensive. The other ones, I don't care if I ruin a brush, it's only worth a few bucks. Some of these, like this one's like a $25 brush, so I just want to take a little bit better care. But I'm going to try a variety of these kinds of brushes and see if that will speed up the process. Now I realized one other thing was slowing me down as well, and that was I was spending a lot of time mixing on the canvas itself. So I have my palette traditionally set up like a color wheel all the way around, and if I was mixing from like a magenta into a green, I would do all that mixing on the canvas, and that was taking a lot of time. And so I thought, well, maybe I can set up my palette in a way different than how I typically do, to do a lot of that mixing already on the palette. So that's what I've done here. So I'll show you what I have here. But what I've tried to do here is often on these shapes, I'll go from a green to a magenta, or I'll go from a yellow or an orange into a purple, or an orange into a blue. And a lot of these kind of neutral colors and secondary and tertiary colors that are in the transition point, I thought, well, maybe if I mix all of these kinds of things, think of the different transitions I want to have happen in the first shapes I'm going to paint here, and mix those transitions here on my palette, then potentially that might speed up the process, because I'm not mixing just basically from a pure magenta to say a purple or even into a green, but I've got that mixing done on here, and so it's going to be much quicker. I can just go into the various areas of paint on my palette to make that transition. So we'll see. And in terms of, I think that is going to speed up the process, but in terms of what's the most effective way of laying out the palette, or do I need to have two palettes on the go? I don't know, and that's something I'm going to work on, because I do know a lot of time was spent mixing the paint on the canvas. And again, that's not something I do in my typical work. My more traditional work, it's one stroke, leave it. So my palette is not set up to make subtle gradations from one color to another. So having done that on here, hopefully that will speed up the process. So I'm going to get started on this and try out my new brushes, and we'll see the time lapse. So just to kind of recap where we are, so the canvas was toned with fluid acrylic, the line work was done in black acrylic, and then I've come in with gesso to block in the sun, and then with an azo yellow over top to kind of put that yellow glow in there. Now we have a very thin coating of water-soluble linseed oil made by Holbein, and now I'm about to come in with the water-soluble paints. that's it for today. I'm actually really happy with using the new brushes and with doing the mixing on the palette, more of the transitions from one color to another. I think that's really speeded it up. I know I would not have got this much done using the old brushes, and I had to go in and make corrections like very, very fewer times than normal. Probably about maybe 1/10 or 1/8 the number of times where I had to go over it, because these brushes are really good for cutting in on a sharp edge. So that's just another little thing too. It's like when you're having trouble doing something in your painting, it's like maybe you have the wrong tool. Think about what is it that you need, and the properties that I needed was something that would maintain a very sharp edge. And the hog bristle brushes, as I say, don't do that, particularly when you use them with water, because they kind of plump up, and they're not typically meant to be used in water, more with turpentine and oil-based products. So I'm really happy with how this one's coming along. I think I'm going to get to the point probably where, I mean, these still might take me slightly longer than my typical one, but again, depending on the actual painting, sometimes maybe faster. And I'll be happy with that, because I really don't want to have to be making choices on what I paint based on which one I'm earning more money doing. If I can get to the point where, you know, they're taking around the same amount of time, then I'm just choosing what subject and what style I'm going to paint more just based on what I feel like doing. And that's ultimately what you want to be able to do. If you have to go in the studio every day, you want to be loving what you're doing. So that's it for today. I hope you found this helpful and enjoyable. As always, give me a thumbs up if you like this. I welcome your comments and questions. If you haven't already, please subscribe, share it with your friends. I'm Tim Packer, and I thank you for your time.